So a few weeks ago, I had the pleasure of doing an interview with a donor-conceived person. And today, you are all going to hear the story of Hilary Marsh. It's an amazing story. I know you all are going to really love it. So sit tight and enjoy the interview. Before we send you over to that, as you're watching, as questions and comments come up, because I know that they will, please make sure that you leave those comments down below for us, and we will do our best to answer them. Enjoy the interview. All right. Well, I'm so excited to have you here today, Hilary, and really, honored to be able to hear your story and share your story. Before we get started, or before I start asking questions, I should say, why don't you tell all the viewers a little bit about yourself, kind of, maybe in one or two sentences to sum it up.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. My name is Hilary Marsh. Born and raised on Long Island. I currently live in upstate New York with my husband, who I've known since I was 12. So we have a
Oh,
cute little love story. I'm the published author of the Forever Haze of After, and that kind of shares my story. I'm looking forward to talking about it a little bit more with you today.
well, you already mentioned it right there. The book that you authored. Where did it come from? What was the inspiration? Why did you decide to write it?
Yeah, so growing up, I sort of had this crazy life. And as a teenager, my friends would always be like, Hill, you have to write a book. Like, this isn't normal. And it sort of got in my head that, hey, maybe I do have kind of these cool stories going on. And I really started to create that goal for myself. And actually, in my book, I include excerpts of diary entries I wrote growing up. And you kind of see that I reference, oh, maybe I'll include this in the book. Maybe I'll include that in the book. So it was always a personal goal, honestly, probably since I was 12 or 13 years old. It was one of those goals that as life continued, it sort of was like, how am I going to attain this? I don't know how to write. I'm not a writer. I don't know how to publish a book. And then when COVID hit in 2020, my husband and I had closed on our house 6 days before. So, like, we closed on March 6th, 2020, and the world shut down on the 13th. And we moved to a county in upstate New York. We didn't know one singular person, and nobody wanted to talk to strangers, let alone, talk to people that you knew. So I kind of said to my husband, I'm going to try to write this book now. I felt like if I didn't do it then, I didn't know when I would do it. And I took being forced to stay home as an opportunity to fulfill my goal. And I'm really happy that I did.
That's awesome. Well, we're happy you did. I'm hopeful, those who read it are thrilled about it. But I love the kind of to hear that story, the progression of where you thought about it and kind of how it happened, and that opportunity in 2020 for that to really come to fruition. So
Yeah.
did you always have an idea that this would be the topic of a book, or you just thought, like, I know I want to write a book and I've got a lot of things to share, but when this part of your life opened up, then it became more clear that this was going to be, because certainly at 12, writing a book versus when you were older as an
Of
adult writing a
course.
book is
Yeah.
going to be different, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I always knew, my parents had one of those crazy divorces when I was younger. A lot of things were happening that were, abnormal, where my friends were like, this is crazy. You have to write about this. And I kind of thought, are other people going through this? You never really know how widespread certain issues are. When I found out I was donor conceived, and then 10 years later found my biological father and siblings, it kind of clicked, like, this could be my happy ending. I never knew where the story was going to start or end. And that kind of inspired me, as that would be a really cool ending. And then I was able to kind of put everything together. The title of the book is The Forever Haze of After. And that kind of means, like, you know, everybody in the world, no matter who they are, where they're from, everybody goes through a life changing moment, right? They could be good, bad. And it can happen. It can happen right now. You and I can get a phone call right this second that could change our lives forever. And we will never be the same as we were in this moment. And the Forever Haze of After is kind of that feeling that, when you have a life-changing moment, you are now in the forever haze of after. You will never be who you were before. And I decided to write the book about my moments, my life-changing moments. Finding out I was donor conceived was a life-changing moment, and then
Mhm.
finding my biological family was another life-changing moment. And then I had some sprinkled, other moments in between in the book, but that's kind of the gist of it. So I felt like everybody could relate to that concept.
Yeah, that's actually a beautiful thought, and
Thank you.
something that I think many of us just kind of look past, these key moments in life that really change our lives forever. And certainly
Mm.
finding out that you were donor conceived, and then finding your father, all your donor father, all of these are certainly life-changing events. So taking it back, because one of the things that really stood out for me and why we're having this conversation is because you were donor conceived.
Yes.
So at what age did you find out that you were donor conceived?
So I was the ripe age of 20. It was an interesting situation. I had mentioned before, my parents were going through a really tough divorce, and the relationship with the man who tried to raise me, it kind of got to a point of no return. I was, in college, going through what a lot of people do in college, finding themselves, learning to live on their own. And that relationship with the man who tried to raise me was just really holding me back. I mean, it was so toxic, it was so negative that my mom sort of was realizing that. And there were a few situations that happened where, my mom was like, look, just cut him out of your life, just move on. And I kept saying, I don't know why, but I kept saying, how am I supposed to do that? He's my dad. He made me. And I kept saying to her, he made me. And that's kind of like a weird term to use, right? And I don't know why I said that, but it got to a point where my mom was like, okay, we have to talk, because she realized that I was holding on to this negative relationship because I thought I sort of owed it to him. And she sort of wanted to free me of that. And she decided to tell me in that situation that he actually didn't make me, and I was a sperm donor baby.
There's these moments often are come in heated conversations or difficult times, where we find out crucial information like this. So I'm sure that was as you mentioned, it was already a life-changing event for you, but I'm sure it was, eye-opening and shocking to hear that. You know, you talk about just this positive aspect of being donor conceived, and you know, my imagination is that that came around a little bit later, right? Like when you find out in that moment, it's a shock. You have to process information. So I imagine that you weren't so thrilled, to find out that you were donor conceived at that specific moment. But where was that turnaround time where you said, wow, this could be something really unique or something special, and you thought really positively about it?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and you're exactly correct. In the beginning, I was, my college roommates say I walked into a bedroom one person and I walked out an hour later a different person, because I immediately had like an identity crisis,
Sure.
like for 20 years you're thinking that this guy, you're half of him. I was a little worried, honestly, at some points, like, am I going to turn out like him? Am I going to have a temper like him? And you also kind of feel a little betrayed, honestly. You sort of feel like, why didn't anyone tell me sooner? It's not like the divorce got bad that day. It had been going on for a long time. So in the beginning, I also was going to school for psychology, so I was in the middle of learning about your mind and nature versus nurture, and I was literally taking courses on that and studying it. So I was like really freaking out. It took a while, honestly, to kind of, I had a lot of things to process. It took a little bit for me to realize this is kind of a relief. I'm not going to be like this man that I was a little scared to become. So that was one thing that sort of made me feel like maybe this isn't as awful as I think it could be. I got hit with a little bit of like a roadblock. I tried to find my donor through the donor agency, but I'm 35, so I was born in 1988. Everything was anonymous back then because nobody could even think of how science is today. So 23andMe, Ancestry.com, finding your biological parent, that was never, no one could dream that would get to where we are now. So when I reached out to the sperm donor agency, they're like, you're never going to find him. They were like, it's total anonymity laws. And then I, kind of felt like, oh man. And then I had to go through that, like, oh my God, I'm never going to know where I came from. So I kind of went from being relieved that I wasn't going to be like the man who raised me to then sort of like, I just had to deal with something that I didn't like the answer, I just didn't want that to be the case. So it took me a couple of years to kind of realize like it just is what it is. It did help me deal with the relationship I had with the man who raised me because I felt disconnected at that point. I felt kind of a relief on my shoulders. So that sort of helped me grow in that sense. Obviously, once I found my biological father and 8 siblings, I mean, my story is admittedly such a fairy tale that it's hard to not, feel positive or happy. So, and that was 5 years ago. So it was definitely, I would say that, of course, and not that it's so obvious, but was the game changer for me.
So you found out when you were 20 that you were donor conceived, and then it
Yeah.
seems like within a year or two, correct me if I'm wrong, that you had this notion like, well, I want to find out who my biological father is,
Hmm.
and you started to look for him, couldn't find him, and then about 8 years later than that, right, or 10 years total from when you
Yep.
found out to that's when you were able to actually find out who your biological father was and find out that you had other siblings that you were not aware of. Is that accurate?
Yeah, pretty accurate. I wanted to know who I started the process immediately when
Oh,
I
okay.
found out. Like, I mean, I'm talking within a couple of weeks. I said to because my mom was like, "Look, I can reach out to the agency and see what they have." And they sent her. They were like, "This is all we have for you," and they sent a copy of the donor application, which in the '80s was a one-page piece of paper typed on a typewriter, front and back, and it basically said the year he was born, his ethnicity. It had like a little section, like when you go to the doctor and they make you like do check marks next to things, like have you ever had cancer or high blood pressure? It had one of those with some check marks of like allergies, and that he was going to dentistry school, and that was really it. Hair color, eye color, really, really basic. And then they gave a donor code at the top. So each donor gets a designated
Hmm.
code, and his was C380. And they told me that although I wouldn't be able to find him, I could log on to the DSR, which is the donor sibling registry. And that's a platform where I can insert the donor code. And then if anybody else was on the platform and also inserted the donor code, it would sync us up as siblings. But that was also a dead end. And they were like, that's really all, the only options you have at this point. So I did that. And then honestly, I kind of went on with my life. I was in my early 20s. I was graduating from college. My husband and I were best friends at the time. We started dating. We had our own journey, and a lot of Forever Haze of After moments that you'll read about. And then we got married and just tried to kind of figure out life in our late 20s. And I actually bought him a 23andMe test, and they had a sale, like buy one, get one half off. So I was like, whatever, I might as well try. And I was the one who got all the cool results. So that was exactly 10 years from when I found out I was donor conceived. I was 20 when I found out. I was 30 when I did 23andMe. So it was 10 years.
Amazing, amazing. Just and even more so, I just got this big smile on my face when you said, I wasn't even going to order the kit for
I wasn't.
myself,
Yeah, I wasn't.
and I got
Yeah.
an extra one for me.
Yep.
So you put in you send off your information, you get your results, you log into 23andMe,
Mhm.
and then how quickly did it say you have relatives, or I think, am I accurate? It says you have
Mhm.
relatives or something like that, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So when you do 23andMe, for whoever's not familiar, you basically spit into a tube, you send it in, you do your profile online, and then there's an option when you're filling out your profile that says, do you want to opt into what 23andMe calls a DNA share? So that's their program where anybody else who did 23andMe, if they also opted into the DNA share, they would compare your DNA to everyone else that opted in, and you would get matched up with people if there was a match. So when I saw that, I kind of clicked it as a joke. Like I said to my husband, I guess, this is my last chance for real, so we'll see. And it maybe took, I don't know, 2 weeks. And I get an email at work and it says, like, hi, Hillary, 23andMe. We found your relatives. Click below. But I really wasn't expecting anything. So I just brushed it off. I didn't even open up the email. I got home that night. My husband was at work. And I was like, oh, let me check that email. Now, most people I knew had found distant cousins, 1, 2, 3% match, which I wasn't interested in, because
Right.
that's so disconnected. And I literally open up the app, and no joke, in the middle of the screen, a little pop up, and it's like, "Hi, Hillary, we found your father. We found a 51% match and predict Jay so and so is your father." So I obviously thought it was a total joke. Like I was like, "This is a joke." So, and then I'm like, 51%, that doesn't make sense. You get 50% from your mom, 50% for your dad. So I'm like, how do I have a 51% match with somebody? And there's a little section where it says meet your relatives, and they list them in basically like strength related, so highest percentage. So it had Jay listed at 51%, and then it had three other names listed as half siblings with 20 to 26 roughly percent match. And that was one of my forever haze of after moments, because opening up that email, you know, changed my life in incredible ways. And here I am now.
Yeah, I mean, as you tell the story, no one can see it on me, but like I've got chills as you're
Mhm.
talking about this piece, because it's uh it's amazing. I mean, I've done 23andMe, and to to be able to log in and see that and get those emails, and then realize on your side, I could just imagine on your side, like,
Yeah.
oh my God, I found my biological father. I mean, this is
Yeah.
this is crazy.
Oh yeah, I thought I was
So
being pranked. I was looking in the
right,
closet.
of
Like I
course.
was I had no, like I'm like, yeah, right. Like it really took, I literally was looking in closets. Like I'm like, is this a joke? Like, but it was not.
And so you found that out, and how quickly, like, were you able to contact them
Yeah.
immediately, and did you?
Yes. So with that portion of the 23andMe app, they have like a little chat feature. You basically can just like message somebody. So of course I message, Jay, the hit for my dad. I'm like, hi, I got this weird notification. I'm just wondering like if this is possible, if you would like to talk. Nothing for a couple of days. So I'm like, all right, you know, it is what it is. Just maybe this is a mistake. And then I think it was my husband that he was like, did you reach out to any of the other connections? And I'm like, oh, I should probably try that. Meanwhile, those days that Jay wasn't answering me, I'm Googling his name. I'm looking at every Facebook profile in the United States with that same name, just trying to see, do I look like this guy? Or this person looks too young, or whatever it is. I didn't really think about the siblings for whatever reason, but I ended up messaging one that was matched up as my brother. And within 2 minutes of sending that message, he immediately got back to me and he was like, hey, it looks like you're on the same journey as me. Let me know if texting is easier, because, through the app, it was like a little weird to
Mm-hmm.
chat. And he's like, let me know if texting is easier. Here's my number. So I was like, the same journey as me, like, and then I started freaking out, then I was like, oh my God, is this real? Could this really be my biological family? So took a bunch of deep breaths. I texted him and he was like, do you want to talk on the phone? And I was shaking like a leaf. I mean, I could, it was happening really
I'm sure.
quickly.
Yeah.
And we ended up talking that night. It was kind of late in New York. It was like 10:30 p.m. My brother, who I was speaking to, was in Kansas City, actually. So he was a
Mm.
couple of hours earlier. And, my husband was sleeping. So I'm like, is this really all happening right now? So I spoke to my brother, Will, and I'm like, so, like, is this real? Like, are we really siblings? Like, who's this guy, Jay? He's like, oh, Jay is wonderful. I just met him last month. We have this. And I was like, wait, you met Jay? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, well, Jay's not answering me. And he's like, oh, he doesn't have his notifications on. I'll text him right now and tell him about you. So I was like, wait, I'm not ready yet, and
It's a
he
lot at one
basically,
time.
it was too much at one time,
Yeah.
honestly. Like, I
Yeah.
was really shaky, and you just don't know what to expect. Obviously, I had never spoken to anybody in a similar situation, and this was just weird. I also
Mm-hmm.
was a little bit nervous, honestly. My mom and my brother that I grew up with, we are super tight, and in a weird way, I wasn't sure, like, am I betraying them? I'm talking to this guy. He says he's my brother, but what about my actual brother? How's he going to feel? So I honestly was a little hesitant at first. I was just trying to figure everything out at once. When I spoke to my brother, Will, who I was connected with on 23andMe that night, and he tells me that, he was found out when he was a kid that he was a sperm donor baby. And when him and his wife decided that they wanted to start a family, they were like, let's do 23andMe just to learn a little bit about our medical history. That was something that for those 10 years, when I found out I was a sperm donor kid and when I found my biological father, I had severe anxiety over my medical history.
Mm-hmm.
You just don't know. And in this day and age, there's so many things and so many cancers and diseases and that was a huge obstacle for me, where I was calling my doctors like, erase my records, I don't know my father's side, and that was
Mm-hmm.
really tough for me. So Will, my brother who I was speaking with, was explaining that that's kind of why he did 23andMe. And when he matched up with Jay, they ended up connecting through a crazy story. It's not even believable, the story, but it's in my book about how
Yeah.
they connected through a mutual friend through Facebook. It was a dog breeder, believe it or not. That was the mutual connection, who got in touch with Jay and was like, you have to check 23andMe because there's some kids out there that are saying you're their dad. So when that happened, Jay invited Will and his family out to meet them. And Will went out, I believe, alone or with his wife at first. And that kind of spiraled the introduction. So that was a crazy night for me. Will told me a lot about Jay, and he's like, hey, if you're open to it, I'm going to text the group tonight. And I'm like, what group? And he's like, the rest of your sisters. He's like, we're all in a group chat. He's like, you got 3 other sisters. And then he explained that Jay and his wife had 3 kids of their own, which are also half siblings. So at that point, I was the 5th bio kid. That's what we call each other. We call each other bio,
Yeah.
like biological siblings. I was the 5th bio sib to be found. Jay had 3 kids of his own, so that was 8 of us. And then within like 6 months of me doing my test, we found our other brother Max. So we found him a couple of months later. So there's 9 of
Amazing.
us. Yeah, there's 9 of us.
Truly, truly an amazing story. And one of the questions that I had, but I think you've already answered it. So it was, what were all the other biological siblings open, to connecting and meeting and talking as you were? It sounds like everybody was.
Yeah, great question. So, obviously everybody went into this in different scenarios and in different circumstances of their life and why they even went on this platform in the first place. So, we're all very close. I mean, we have a group chat. There's 22 of us in it. It's everyone plus their spouses, then plus some kids. And we're in constant contact. I mean, daily, if not, if we miss a day, it's because there's so many of us, but we're all in contact. We get together once a year. We try, we're spread across the country, and I have one sister in Canada, so we're kind of all over the place. There's three of us in New York. Jay and his family are in LA. I have a sister in Phoenix. I have a brother in Kansas City, and then Canada. So we just try to be realistic. We see each other once a year, at least. That's our goal, and we get together, and we have all, we're all kind of the same age. So,
Yeah.
in the 80s, you couldn't freeze sperm like you can now. Now I have a lot of friends who, if they have fertility issues or if they're in a same-sex marriage, they get a bunch of vials of sperm and they freeze them, and then all their kids have the same, biological father.
Biological.
But
Yeah.
that wasn't the case in the 80s. They didn't have that science. So, Jay always says, yeah, I guess my sperm was good for 2 or 3 years, because we're all within a 2 or 3 year age range, which has made it really cool because we were at really similar points in our lives, right at that like 30 prime age. We were all basically married or in very long-term relationships, and we all found each other within 6 months of each other, which to me is the
Wow.
craziest part of the story, because like my brother Max grew up with two moms, right? So he knew his whole life that his dad wasn't involved. My brother Will found out when he was 10 he was a sperm donor. My sisters found out at different ages, and then I find out at 20. And we all waited, for whatever reason, to do these tests within, I think it was like 6.5 months. And then we have not found anyone since finding my brother Max, which was 6 months after me. So I do kind of believe this was fate, honestly. I really
I
do.
I would agree. It truly sounds that way. Now you reference all of you getting together once a year,
Yeah.
and I know from our previous conversation you call it BioFest.
Yeah.
So is BioFest a does it feel like just a regular family reunion, or is it feel any different?
Nope, it totally feels like a family reunion. I mean, at this point, the first or second one, you're still figuring, traveling with anyone, it could be a little bit weird.
Yeah.
So those first few times when we were just sort of starting to build our relationship, I would say that those felt a little bit different. But then as the years go on, it's been 5 years now, and we've gotten together at least once a year. But then some of us see each other more. The ones that are in New York, we get together every 3 or 4 months, let's
Hmm.
say. So as those relationships start to form, and like, the brothers, they're constantly in their football bickering. So, you start to have, it feels like friendships. Like it really
Yeah.
does. It feels like really close friendships. And then we're all sitting around at a breakfast table in the middle of California, and you're like, wow, I'm with 7 biological siblings, and then our biological nieces and nephews. And that's when you start to feel like, you get those butterflies in your stomach. Like, is this real life? And everybody genuinely loves each other. I mean, it's not like this BS, if you don't want to be involved, no one's forcing you to be
Hmm.
involved. And it's like, and one of the first things Jay said to all of us when he first spoke to us was, however you want me to be in your life, I'll be there. And he always jokes that he got to skip the breakups and the high school and, and the college debt, and he didn't have to pay for any of that. And he got to be a part of our lives when we were kind of older and established and, a little bit
Sure.
more mature. But he really made it comfortable, in my opinion, for all of us because nothing was forced. In fact, the first time I spoke to him, he's like, "So my youngest son is actually in college at NYU," which was less than an hour from me. Obviously
Sure.
it was in Manhattan. So he's like, "I'm coming out there next month to see him. Like, would you want to get lunch?" So I met Jay quickly, even though he was on the other side of the country when, we first connected. So he made it really comfortable for us. It was weird for him too. He
Sure.
didn't expect this. And then I think that kind of let everything organically grow into the relationships they are now. My husband says, he's like, "I love being with your siblings because I feel like I'm just with a bunch of different yous. You guys have such similar personalities and we're all obviously different, but I think at our core, we are very similar and it's really cool."
Yeah, it's a beautiful story. And I think of how amazing the whole progression was and how everything, evolved. Um, but I know not all, donor conceived relationships end up in the same way. And I know there's a lot of, emotions that go into this. What is one misconception that you think there is about being donor conceived?
So it's a great question. I think I was a little naive, admittedly, just in terms of my situation, because so one of the bio sibs actually, is in a same sex marriage with her wife and works for the California Cryobank. So they actually brought this up to me and they were like, "Yeah, we're getting a lot of hate on social media from other donor conceived kids who think, that they were made of science and not love." And when I first heard that, I was like, "Okay, I get the point. We were made with science." And not to, negate anything else, but I think we were actually made with a little bit of more love because we were really thought out, we were
Yeah.
really planned. It's to go through that whole process of, with your spouse and, you're dealing with infertility issues and then you have this opportunity to get an egg or a sperm donor. That's a lot of, it's financial, it's emotional, it's mental. So I think a big misconception is, I was reading some negative comments where people, other kids who were donor conceived were like, "This isn't a positive experience. We weren't asked to be born." But I thought, like, no one really is,
Right.
like, like, in fact, we were so thought of and invested in that I think, in terms of the misconceptions, I would, when I first heard that, I was kind of blown away. Like, I didn't even, and, admittedly, I get it. I get my story is a bit, you know, fairy tale like. And I'm the first one to say, it's like a book, which is literally why I wrote one. But, a lot of people have reached out to me that have read my book that have been like, "Wow, I found out I was donor conceived and now I want to reach out to these siblings I matched up with," because, you just never know. Some people now are finding 30, 40, 50 siblings. Like, that's
Right.
really overwhelming. And
Sure.
I feel a little blessed that our group has, nine. It's kind of easy to keep up with, once you get to 30, 40, 50, that does
Yeah.
seem very overwhelming. But you could find one or two siblings where they can literally feel like your brothers or sisters. And out of this donor kids, so there's nine of us, but six of us were donor conceived. Four of them were only children. So they didn't grow up with any siblings. And now,
Hmm.
they have us. And not all of us have the same relationship. We might not all equally be as close to one another, but you do find those people where you're like, "Yep, that's my sister," and she feels like it. And I think that in terms of all these misconceptions, like, maybe it would be better for people to think about the positives that they can get out of it, even if they don't find their donor, like the siblings are who you're probably going to bond with for a really long time. And it's been, it's been incredible. I mean, I talked to my sisters all the time, and I think people should really consider, forming those relationships, because you just never know.
I mean, it's a beautiful message. I was actually going to ask you a follow-up to that, and you could say, no, that's my message. But, if is there something different or more that you would share with others who might not feel the same way as you do about being donor conceived?
I would say that is to, like, really think about what went into creating you. I mean, there's, like I was saying before, that there's so much thought into it. If two people aren't in love and if two people don't want kids, they are not going to go through a donor agency,
100%.
So, like, I feel like you're made with science and a lot of love, not to negate how anyone else is made in a
Yeah.
traditional situation, but I'm just saying, you got to think about, like, what went into it to create you. And yes, there was science, but that's the way of the world these days.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we see in the work we do how much these parents, these intended parents, really want to have families, want to have children, and how much they go through and what they put into it. So I totally can relate to what you're saying, and I think it's a beautiful message. I love your story. I really appreciate you sharing this story with us. Um, for all the viewers watching, where can they find your book? I think you've got a website, right?
Yes, I do. So it's the foreverhazeofafter.com, or you can just search it on Amazon. You're able to purchase it both ways. So whichever's easier for you.
Awesome. And we're going to put a link in the description below, so to make it easier for all of you to find that book. Hilary, once again, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you so much for sharing your story here, but also for, how valuable your book is. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
So hopefully you all loved that video, that interview, as much as I did. I found it fascinating and super interesting. If you haven't already liked this video, please give us a thumbs up. And if you're not already a subscriber to our YouTube channel, please make sure to subscribe so you can find out more information on using a donor in the future. If you want more information now on picking a donor and working with YourEggs, then you can download the YourEggs app through your iPhone or your Android phone, and you can go directly to our website at youreggs.com. See you in the next video.